is a penguin a bird? And if it is, what makes it a bird? So in order for a biologist to categorise something as a bird, there are three key features that we would look for, and flight is not one of them. The first and foremost one here is the egg. So all birds will lay a hard-shelled egg which requires incubation in order for it to hatch. Number two, so both these birds have feathers, although these are sort of the ones you sort of imagine when you think of a bird. And then when you see these penguins, they kind of look rubbery, but they are indeed feathers. The beak, there we go. So all birds have this toothless jawed beak. So those are the sort of the three things that come into mind when a biologist would like to categorise something as a bird. So flight doesn't really come into it. So world over, it's quite a surprise to people that there are 17 species of penguins in the world. All the penguins are these flightless aquatic birds, so they really do spend the majority of their time at sea. And that's quite hard for us to visualise, I suppose, because we mainly see them on the land. So they come to the land in order to lay their eggs and raise their chicks, and also we've seen them doing that molting phase. So when they replace all those feathers, they really need to be dry and on the land. But there are some penguin species that basically live about 75% of their lives in the sea. What makes these penguins able to live in these conditions? And first and foremost is those feathers. So now, in order to keep this waterproof coating in pristine conditions, right down here at the base of their tail, see there's a small sort of opening there. So that's called the preen gland. So it's an adaptation with these birds. So these birds have this preen gland, and they've evolved to stimulate that gland to excrete a really oily substance, which they sort of put on their beaks and then will spread all over their body. So they've got the oil from the base, and then they sort of go through all their feathers, and this is just their cleaning and their maintenance. So they often nibble at the feathers, and this is to help remove any that are maybe loose and falling out, so they can pluck them away. And it also helps to get rid of any of that dirt as well that's left. So this is a nice waterproof coating for the feathers. But if you were to pluck one or got to see one, the actual rest of the feather consists of all this lovely fluffy kind of feathers. So this is really their insulation then. So all those fluffy layers are there, they form a barrier themselves, but they also trap a layer of air in there, and that helps to keep the penguins warm, and some penguins can use that to be able to aid in their buoyancy as well. So they really need these feathers in pristine condition because they spend so much time in the sea. So they've got some evolutionary adaptations for that life in the sea, and we often call it that they fly through the water. We would have seen lots of the chicks. Lots of people ask me why they're constantly flapping at their feathers, and that's just to strengthen all those muscles so they can propel themselves through the sea. But their wing itself is completely different to what you see in the flightless birds. So it's very much reduced in size. All the bones have been flattened, and quite a few of them are fused together. And the whole structure of the wing is incredibly stiff. So with other birds, they tend to fold their wings up and in and out. But with the penguins, they don't. They really are sort of the way they are. And that's just, again, to get that lovely paddle, or what we call a flipper, in order for getting them through the water. So that's sort of a huge evolutionary advantage to this. Whole body streamlined. Their feet are really far down at the bottom of their bodies, and they have them sort of poking out the back when they're in the water. And that, along with those lovely long tails of the gentoos, they kind of use that as a rudder then to help with their agility in the water. So yeah, lots of lovely adaptations for being in the water itself. The bones are completely different to those of flying birds. So all those flying birds really need to minimise the weight. So how they've evolved is that their bones are very hollow, they're full of lots of lovely air sacs, and that just keeps that whole structure really, really light. But because the penguins do not fly, their bones are completely different. So they're very solid, they're very dense, and they're incredibly heavy actually compared to the others. And this again will just help with their buoyancy and their sort of streamlining. So the whole reason they're going in the water is this is where they find their dinner. So the penguins are amazingly agile, and they're also very deep divers, particularly for the size of them. So for the smaller penguins, so that we'll see along the way, like the Gen 2s, the macaronis, they usually dive within that top 100 metres of water. And that maybe doesn't seem very deep, but if you're thinking a tiny bird sort of standing less than 50 centimetres tall, that's huge distances down. So they're usually recorded in that top 100 metres, often a lot shallower if that's where their food are. But they've been recorded down to a maximum of 200 metres. So that's really, really cool for some of these species. But the record breaker, of course, is the big emperor penguin. So there was a female that some scientists attached some diving loggers and things to, and the record depth she got to was 535 metres. Now the reason they're going down that deep is because this is where their food is, this is where all their prey is. So the penguins take a mixture of compositions, but of these three sort of main animals. So we've got the squid here, the fish, and the krill. So those smaller penguins that we see they tend to take more krill, and then the bigger ones really enjoy the fish. So we knew that the king penguins really like the lanternfish. So it just means that with the composition of different diets, then all the penguins can sort of forage in those same areas. So we know now that the penguins are incredibly agile, and this is so that they can dive, and they pursuit dive, which means they actually chase their prey down. So they can see incredibly well underwater. They see their prey and they chase after it. But they also need to be agile because lurking in those waters we've seen the fur seals like to attack them, leopard seals attack them, and often some of the whales will attack them too. So they like to be sort of nifty on their feet in order to avoid the jaws of those. So porpoising just means it's similar to what the whales and dolphins certainly do, and it's just a way of maintaining a very fast speed in the water, but when you're required to still breathe air as you go. So what they do is, as they swim along, the penguins do it really quite often, every few seconds or so, that they just sort of jump above the water, and that gives them enough time just to take in that little breath, and that means they can maintain these speeds for travelling to get these fast distances. And it's really nice, so often that we can see the penguins out at sea on approach to where we're going to land, and it just means you might be able to get those penguin species ticked off your list before we even get to where we're going. But we do know that they do need to come to land, and that's to have their eggs, their chicks, and to do their molt. So when they come to land, they often end up spending periods of time, what we would say is inactive, I suppose. They look like they're just hanging about, but either they might be incubating their egg or brooding their chick, or as they replacing all those lovely feathers. So under this amazing waterproof coat, they've actually got quite a thick layer of blubber, so similar to what the seals have or the whales have. And again, this just helps with their insulation to keep them nice and warm, but also for these periods of starvation. So we know the Gen 2s, while they're incubating the egg, they'll sit for maybe up to a week before they swap over with their partners. And for some of the other penguin species, this can be even longer. So while they're sitting there, they can't feed themselves, so they just use all these internal resources. So that's how often you'll see some really chubby, fat-looking penguins after they've just fed from the sea. And maybe the ones that are headed back out are like a lot slimmer looking because they've used up some of that internal resources. One other lovely feature, I love penguin feet, I just have a little thing for them, is they've got an amazing adaptation in their feet. They don't want, I'm trying to explain it. So, because they're featherless, the feet really are areas of heat loss. So, the penguins don't want their feet to be too warm because it would melt the ice below them, and they just don't want to waste any of that heat. So they've evolved two systems in order to reduce this. So first of all, they've got amazing control of how much blood they flow through their feet. So they can really regulate it. So there's actually periods of time where they'd like more blood to go to the feet to lose more heat. And that's particularly while they're waddling, their walking takes quite a lot of energy, quite a lot of effort, so they get hot, so they may want to lose heat that way. And also when they're diving for their prey, that can be incredibly, it's really energetic, so they're building up quite a lot of heat in the body. So if they flush more blood to their feet, it's just a way of helping get rid of some of that excess heat. And again, so while their feet are in contact with the ground, any of you that will camp and things will know this as well, that the ground just sucks all that heat from your body. So they just sort of tuck their feet up, just in order to keep them warm. There's less contact with the ground, so that'll just lessen that heat exchange there. Lovely. So actually just some of the adaptations I wanted to share with you today, just about how these penguins have evolved in order to be able to, well, they thrive down here. They don't just survive, you know, this really is their element and what they're designed, where they're designed to live in. And yeah, hopefully we'll see a bit more snow and things as we go south.
That is a great question. Collectively, aforementioned families actually belong to what's collectively called the pinnipeds. And pinna means wing or fin, and of course ped means foot. So it literally translates into fin-footed. In the three groups, you have your walrus, your true seals, what are called phocids, and then you have your eared seals, which includes both sea lions and fur seals. And of course, we've also seen the elephant seal, which is an example of a true seal, or what's called a phocid, formerly called an earless seal, which is a bit of a misleading misnomer, because it's not to say they don't have ears, it just begins with an orifice in the side of the head, which is quite apparent. But from this point forward now, we'll be seeing the crab eater, the Weddell seal, and what's the one I'm missing? Leopard seal, thank you. And those are all examples of true seals. But at the conclusion of the Antarctic fur seal breeding, the males will be abandoning the females, and they will be left to nurse their pups throughout the remainder of the austral summer. And the male fur seals will be joining us on the peninsula later on this month, beginning and then throughout the rest of the summer. So they're going to migrate against the Antarctic circumpolar current to hit that concentration of krill. So stay tuned. Of course, there will be a presentation and we can discuss it ad nauseum.
The crow's nest. Well, originally the crow's nest got its name because in the old sailing days, they would take a cage full of crows up to the highest point on the mast, and if they lost sight of land, they would let a crow go, because as the crow flies, it would fly back to land. So then they knew which direction land was. And then later on, the crow's nest became important because that was where the lookout would go, and he'd have a higher vantage point, and he was known as the barrel man, because normally it was a barrel that they would tie up right on high in the mast so he could get some protection from the elements. And that's the story of the crow's nest.
What is swell? Well, I think it really depends on what context you're using the word in. I'm swell.
With king penguins, and for a lot of people it was pretty amazing to get out and do that walk, see the king penguins, and to see some of those fantastic sights. But to get into Stromness and to walk up to the waterfalls, and did anybody give it any thought to where you were walking and the history behind it? Because it's remarkable, to the story of survival, what the guys went through just to get to that riverbed, and walking over the island, walking down the falls, or sliding down the falls, but to get to the riverbed. But just that feeling, could you imagine after those 400 plus days at sea, and the first sound of civilization was from the whaling station?